Hello, everybody, and welcome to this virtual masterclass. Skihan Pereira here, and I'm really looking forward to sharing some ideas with you about the future, which is what I talk about, and specifically today, talking about some of the business challenges that many leaders in Australia and the region are facing in 2023. And I'm going to share with you some research that was done by KPMG, some annual research that they do, and I'll share with you the latest research from 2023. About the biggest challenges that the leaders are saying they're facing. But I want to make this more than just a report. So I'll also focus on your challenges as well. So there'll be time for that. There'll be time for interaction as we go. There are a lot of people here who know who I am, but some who don't. I can see some new names as well as some familiar names and faces. So my name is Gihan Pereira. I'm a business futurist. I've worked with lots of organizations, across lots of industries, particularly in the last 10 years as a futurist, telling people, well, two things. So one is what's coming up over the horizon, which of course people always want to know, but especially now as a result of the pandemic, people are asking, how do we lead when we've got so much uncertainty and disruption and chaos in the future? We thought that COVID was really a big, huge disruption, which it was and continues to be for many people. And then suddenly ChatGPT comes along and it's a technology disruption that's going to affect us all. And then there's global supply chain problems, and there's inflation and cost of living and finding talent and so on. So those are the sort of things that I talk about. And we talk a little bit about that today. These are some of the organizations that I've worked with at a leadership level, and I think there are a couple of people, there are some people here who have been my clients in the past. So some of these ideas will be familiar to you, but I hope that you'll still get something of value from this session, because of course, one of the nice things about being a futurist is that my content and my advice and my suggestions always keep changing. Hello, Harves, good to see you here as well. So great to see so many people joining today. If you're attending live, you'll get the most value from this session. If you're watching the recording, hello to you, and you'll definitely get some value as well. But if you're attending live, it'll be quite an interactive session. So my 3 rules of engagement on that topic. One, I'd like you to give you some things to think about. And ideally, and I say this in all my presentations, give yourself the permission today to think big. Think bigger than what you think is realistic, because I think that's more valuable. If you think big now and then you have to walk it back a little bit later, that's easier than only thinking about what's right in front of you now and then have to expand your thinking when life gets in the way later. And the second thing is be a bit playful today. So there will be the chance for you to ask questions. There'll be the chance for us to engage with each other. And I'll be asking you some questions as well. Have your smartphone ready? Because I've got a few things that I'm going to ask you to scan, a few QR codes to do some polls, but I've also got some goodies to give away. And you can just do that by, I'll have a QR code here for you to scan. One of the good things that's come out of COVID is that everybody now knows how to use QR codes. I've been rabbiting on about this for a decade now and talking about some innovative examples of QR codes, but in the past, it was a little bit of a fringe thing because not many people knew how to use it, but now we do. Third rule of engagement, I want to give you some actions that you can take away and put into practice immediately after you hang up, after you finish watching this recording. All right, let's do some QR codes. Let's do a poll, a quick poll here. As I said, I'm going to be talking about some research done by KPMG about business challenges from Australian leaders, but I'd like to know, just for you, what is your biggest business challenge right now? Here now is you can go to menti.com and use that code at the top. Okay, so thank you very much for the people who've started responding. I do this at the start of each year, by the way, when I run my early in the year, I run a presentation like this for leaders, and I'll also share with you what people said last year. Right, so interesting. So there's yeah, okay, remote and on-site, yep, workforce planning, staff. So there's a lot of things around talent, which is good, which is interesting, and engagement, around connectivity, about managing change. Yeah, finding good people. So there's clearly a trend here with the people who are in the room, that we're talking about leading people, which is absolutely critical. And yeah, we'll talk about that, and you'll see what Australian leaders are saying as well. Okay, thank you very much for doing that. Thanks so much for sharing. That's really, really valuable, and thank you for doing that. Let me share for you now what people said when I ran this same survey last year. And there's a lot of commonality. So there's still people talking about things like staff and connecting people and hybrid workplace, which came up again this year in slightly different words. And there was a lot of talk this time last year around anxiety and stress and overwork and finding staff and so on. And some of those things are still there. Exhaustion was there last year as well. Okay, so let me share with you this research that was done by KPMG. So KPMG, every year, they run a survey called Keeping Us Up at Night. And what they do is they survey Australian leaders, senior leaders, CEOs and other senior leaders, and even people in governance positions on boards. And they ask them, what are the things keeping you up at night? And what I'm going to share with you today, these were the top 4. There's a whole, and you can download the KPMG report and read it in full. It's pretty easy, it's pretty short, but these were the top 4, which we're going to focus on today. And number 4, so we'll go 4 to 1. Number 4 was this one that I've been talking about for a long time, particularly in specific industries that have been going through a lot of disruption, which is this idea that we now need to be able to be leading in uncertainty, because we're going to continue facing uncertainty and disruption and chaos in our lives, and we have to be agile and flexible. And it really warms the cockles of my heart to see that Australian leaders now have rated this one of their biggest concerns now. I think all leaders should have been doing it, but now we realize that more and more leaders are realizing this is something that we need to do, to be able to lead in uncertainty. And the book Disrupted is exactly about that. It's about how to lead, given that we've been disrupted. How do we lead, both in terms of our external vision and also leading our people in uncertainty. And number 3 was cybersecurity. And I think last year really highlighted that for many leaders, how much of an issue that is and how much it can be. Now, the best leaders have already been on top of this and are already thinking about it. Number 2, the second biggest thing keeping leaders up at night was this idea of digital transformation. So taking the organization on a digital journey, because we all need to be more digital now. It doesn't mean that everything you do has to be a virtual masterclass. There's still a huge desire and a huge need for in-person experiences, but we still want to use digital to facilitate setting up and the backroom operations and artificial intelligence, helping us improve the customer experience. So we'll talk about that as well. And the number 1 challenge that leaders are facing, which came out in our survey today as well, is around people. It's around finding, keeping, and rewarding the people that we need to lead us in this digital space. So specifically, the KPMG survey called it digital savvy talent, but it's really about finding the best people, finding and keeping the best people. Okay, so now some people are going, well, Gihan, you advertise this masterclass as being the top 3 business challenges, and you've got 4 of them there. And you're right. If you did notice that, congratulations. But also, you're right, and I'm only going to focus on 3 of them. And the reason is the number 3 on there, which is about cybersecurity. There's really not much I can say about that, except to say, as a leader, it's really important, and you should be getting credible experienced experts to help you in this area. It's no longer enough to say we're going to have antivirus software on our individual machines and throughout our whole network, and that's going to protect us. Absolutely, cybersecurity is one of the biggest challenges that we're facing. So let me get that out of the way first, and we won't do much more about that unless you've got any questions. But most of the questions I'm going to say, talk to your experts about it. And if you haven't got experts, get them. So dealing with cyber risks was one of the issues that was raised by Australian leaders. And let me just share with you a couple of pieces of data around that, and then I'll quickly stop for questions. But anyway, we'll see what comes up. So the World Economic Forum rated the idea of cyber security and cyber attacks as one of the top 10 global risks facing us in the forthcoming decade. And I don't mean top 10 technology risks. These were the top 10 global risks among things like pandemic and the possibility of war and climate change and climate disasters. Cyber attacks were one of the top 10 risks for humanity. So this is a big issue. It's a big issue around the world. In Australia, it became really prominent last year with some companies that had some major cyber attacks, and suddenly it was all over the news as well. So it reached a tipping point where the ordinary person realized the issue and the vulnerabilities. This report from Capgemini says that 69% of organizations think that we need AI to be able to mount a suitable defense around cyber attacks. And my take on that is I feel really sorry for the other 31%, because this is it's a significant issue. And if you're not already using AI to prevent and block cyber attacks, you should be. Because what's happening now is that in the old days, there were actually humans who were trying to break into computers and break into devices. Now, the cyber criminals are using artificial intelligence to try and trick humans into basically clicking on links or disclosing passwords, and AI is getting really smart in that area. And because of that, the defense also has to use AI to defend against that. So we've kind of got this AI cybersecurity arms race, and both the attackers and the defenders have to use AI around that. And as I just alluded to, most of cybersecurity problems and most of cyber breaches are actually people problems. So it's not there's a few of these where hackers find some flaw in some software and they can break in through that, but that's the minority. The majority of it happens because somebody gets a link and they click on it and they're tricked into disclosing some information. And or there may be some, let's say, some developer working for a big company and they've got very secure systems, but the developer is doing some testing, so they download some customer database to their own laptop, which is not as secure, and hackers get in that way. So it's almost always happens through people doing the wrong thing, mostly unintentionally. Okay, so that's the thing around cybersecurity. Any questions about that, or any comments or anything you want to add? With just the proviso that I'm almost always going to answer this by saying, talk to your experts. Okay, maybe you've scared everybody off on that and said, okay, you need to talk to your experts, but I really think that's the answer. I'm not qualified to respond to that. And unless you are a cybersecurity expert, you probably don't know the answers either. You probably don't even know the right questions to be asking. So that's something to keep in mind. If you're a leader and you've got responsibility and accountability for anything within your organization, especially around your customers' data, you need to have experts helping you with that. Okay, so that's one of the four. We're not going to do them in any sort of order. I've already jumped around to jump to number 3, but I will look at this one around talent next. My idea in this masterclass was to look at the poll results and then do them in the order that was most prominent in the poll. And it turns out that I had talent as the next one anyway, which was the one that came out as talent broadly was the umbrella that covered most of these in the poll as well. So the way that the KPMG report puts it is talent acquisition, retention, and upskilling or reskilling for a more digitized future. So leaders recognize that we're going to have a more digitized future, and we need to find, keep, and reward the best people for that digitized future. And in the KPMG report, the 77% of leaders rated this as one of their biggest challenges, one of the things that's really, like, if you like, keeping them up at night. 77% is really high, because if you read the KPMG report, all the others are around below 50%. And that might sound like not very much, but there were a lot of things, and you'll see that there's a long tail to it. So some of these things go down to 10, 15, 20%. But this one here really stuck out as one of the, by far and away, the biggest challenge. And it has been for the last 2 or 3 reports before this as well. So this is one of the biggest challenges. one of the biggest challenges that leaders are facing is how do we find, keep, and reward our best people. Now, if you registered for this masterclass early, I sent out an email to all the people who registered, and I said, this is coming up in a few weeks. What's your biggest business challenge? And if possible, I'll cover that. So one person, well, I got a few responses, but I'm going to share one of them here with you here. I'll do it anonymously, but I'm sure that you, if you're a leader, this might resonate with you as well. This person said that our biggest challenge is finding the right people, and then we train them and motivate them and do everything that we can. But how do we make sure that we can keep them, right? Because they're more likely to go somewhere else where they can earn a bit more money, or they are going to go somewhere else where they've got a little bit more flexibility around their work. So, we train the best people, we find the best people, we train them, and then they leave, right? And look, the flippant response to that is, would you rather train people and they leave, or you don't train them and they stay? Okay, so if those are your only two options, then of course you want to train and invest in your people. But this is a challenge that many leaders are facing now. And if you look at the reasons that this person says that their leaders, that their people are leaving, because they want more money. And of course, now the inflation's rising, cost of living is rising. So having a pay rise might be the tipping factor, all other things being equal, or even all other things not being equal. And also the other one, where they can work from home more often, is again, like workplace flexibility is of course something that's become, it's being seen not as a perk, but as an expectation and the norm in the last few years. As a result of the pandemic. I've been talking about workplace flexibility. Some of you will know this. Peter Everett, you might remember, you've been in my network for a long time. John, the same. So I've been talking about this for ages. I wrote a book called Out of Office about working away from a traditional office, but suddenly people realized what that meant during the pandemic. And in 2020, we had the worst example of it, where people were working from home and they were stuck at home because it was illegal for them to actually leave their home. But now that we've opened up again, there's lots of other opportunities around workplace flexibility. So working away from the office doesn't necessarily mean working from home. It can mean working from a cafe down the road, or working in a co-working space one day a week. So there's lots more flexibility available. And a lot of organizations are trying to drag people back into the office. If I can put it bluntly, there are a lot of leaders who are too lazy to figure out how to manage teams who they can't see. So they just think the easiest thing to do is get them back into the office. Not necessarily the best thing for their employees, for the culture, as Michael would know, or for the organization as a whole, but it's an easy thing to do. Some other organizations are finding ways to lead in this, if you like, new normal, where people want more flexibility. So look, this is a challenge, and sorry, I've just gone on my high horse a little bit there, because it's one of my favorite topics to talk about. But this is one of the things that's happening, is that people are leaving not only for money. First of all, they are leaving for money, but not only for money, but there are other things that 3 years ago would have been unthinkable or would have been seen as a perk. So 5 years ago, people were saying, I would happily take a pay cut if I could work from home 1 day a week. Now they're saying, I expect to work from home at least 1, 2, or 3 days a week, and I expect to be paid the same. I'm not going to sacrifice anything from you, like a pay cut, in order to do that. I don't always agree with everything that Richard Branson says, but I like what he says here. You train people well enough so they can leave, and treat them well enough so they don't want to. And this is very much about building that culture, a culture. And for me, as a futurist, I talk about building a culture of change agents, but it's really building that culture where people want to stay, where they're motivated to stay, because they don't want to leave. Graham says many are leaving for increased meaning. Absolutely, Graham. So another thing that the pandemic did was it forced people, or it made people reevaluate, reassess, reconsider what really matters most to them. And many people said, stuff this, I don't want to stay where I'm working anymore. I want to go somewhere else. Or they'd say, I want to spend more time working on something else, on my passion project. So work isn't everything. And many people realize this as a result of the pandemic, because it really made them think about what's important to them. Another thing that came out recently around workplace flexibility, and again, this thing around meaning, Graham, is that there's been huge experiments run over the last year around the 4-day work week. So it's not just working from home 1 day a week, but your total work week is only 4 days rather than 5. And the results are out, and in the UK survey, which is the research which has been going on for the last 6 months, it's been overwhelmingly positive. That the employees they surveyed found that they felt more productive, that they've far fewer mental health and stress and anxiety problems. They got more time to spend with their family and their community. And they said that they were more likely to stay, so it increased loyalty. And on the other side of it, for employers, they found that productivity actually went up. So the way the study was set up was, it was called the 100-80-100 study. So you get paid 100% of your salary, but you only work 4 days a week rather than 5, so 80% of your work hours. So it wasn't like you're working long days. You literally only work 80% of your hours, but you expected to still return 100% productivity. And it just found that there were almost no downsides. It wasn't true for every organization, but it was true for the majority of them. And from the employer side, they found that like revenue for the for-profit companies, revenue companies, it went up by 35% compared to like a pre-COVID time when people were working 5 days a week from home in that kind of old style of work. John says, look, I hope coffee shops don't go to 4-day weeks. So I think what will happen, John, so really, and I know you've put that with a smiley on there, but look, what will happen is, it doesn't mean that the coffee shops are only going to be open 4 days a week. It just means the staff only have to work 4 days a week. And it's true of all of these organizations. They didn't go down to we're only open Monday to Thursday. They still said we're open Monday to Friday, but people could either choose or negotiate with their managers which 4 days they would be working. So it's like they were working like a 4-day shift. And so they wouldn't have to be there Monday to Friday, but somebody would be there Monday to Friday. And with coffee shops, 7 days a week, as happens anyway. Yes, so thanks, John, for just bringing up that point. Okay, so I wanted, because this is such a big topic, and I was going to do little breakout rooms on one of these topics. Let's do it on this one, because this is the biggest one that came out in our poll earlier. So I'm just going to, because we've got so much expertise in the room, and people have got different experiences and different leadership styles and organizations they work with. I just want you to have a conversation and say, what are my talent gaps at the moment? Okay, everybody, welcome back. Thank you for participating in that. I hope you got some valuable ideas from that. Look, I think that whoever you're with, you may that they've got expertise and experience which is different from yours, and that's the value of the diversity in a group like this. I run these kind of sessions, like this particular activity, I run in a number of different contexts, and I find that so for example, if I'm working with an organization's leaders, we might be doing a 1-day workshop where this is one of the activities, and then afterwards I ask people to share, like, what are some interesting insights that you got from people, and they walk around actually, so they're not only getting ideas from the people at their own table, and that's good, that's really good. But interestingly, if I run this as a breakout session at a conference, say an association conference where people are coming in from different businesses, different organizations, because there's so much diversity in the room, and they've got very different backgrounds, they work for different kinds of organizations, even if in the same industry, and they get much richer and much more practical ideas than they would if they're just all leaders in the same organization. Don't get me wrong, it's not only that you get no no ideas if you've got leaders in the same organization. You absolutely do, but you get much richer when you go more diverse. And especially if you have that attitude of whatever suggestion I get, I'm going to go, thank you, rather than immediately dismiss it because that wouldn't work, or I could never get approval for that, or you don't understand because you're in the public sector. Those sort of immediate obstacles to innovation and change. Okay, so just keep that in mind when you're sharing this. If you do this exercise, absolutely do it with your team as well, and especially if you're a leader of leaders, but also try to ask other people outside your organization, obviously looking after confidentiality and privacy as well. Okay, let's move on to the next one. So I won't ask for feedback on this, but I hope you got some useful feedback for yourself. Okay, so the next one here, and we spent most of our time on this first one around talent, because that was, of course, the one that came out in the survey as your biggest priority in the room here. But the other two are like equally important, even if we don't spend as much time on each of them. So this other one, which is the one that I said, like, I love, because this has been my mantra for 10 to 15 years. And with this is the idea of being agile and flexible. And there's some industries that I've worked in over the last 10 years who realize that, yeah, well, isn't this exactly what we have to do? So like financial services is one, for example, where it's almost like every year, say financial planning has had like a disruption in fee for service, value added, education, everything changes almost yearly. Aged care, almost every year there's a federal government report into the aged care sector, and they are completely disrupted by that. And then suddenly the pandemic comes along and everybody's disrupted. So now this is why this has become one of the top priorities now. I've got another poll for you here just to see, again, in the room, if you're in the room, and I want to give value to the people in the room. I've got some questions for you here on a scale of 1 to 10, and I'll quickly outline the questions and then we'll jump to the poll, and you can do that again. So just want to, on a scale of 1 to 10, how important is it for you right now as a leader? Are you, when I say consolidating existing assets, are you looking to look after your market share, grow the market share, work on your existing customers, look after your existing staff, and so on, as opposed to going into completely new markets or looking at disrupting the industry and so on? The next one is knowing what's over the horizon. So for some leaders, this is critical. I think the more senior you are, the more of your salary is being paid for looking at the future, even if it's not easy to do. Is part of your role leading in an uncertain future? Is it finding and keeping the best people? And is it preparing for more disruption and change? So in this poll that's coming up, by the way, you can go to it now, exactly the same as where you were before, and I've already advanced the poll to the next question. So if you don't need to scan the QR code again. If you've already got it open, it should have jumped ahead to the next question. But if you haven't, then scan the QR code. And for each of those questions, you'll be able to put it on a scale of 1 to 10. How important is this to you right now in your business and in your leadership practice? I think I've given you enough time. Let's see what people are saying. Okay. Wow. Okay. So this is really, really high. And especially the thing around finding and keeping the best people. I'm not surprised, obviously, because that came out in the earlier survey. But disruption and change, that's really good to see. It's really good to see. More and more leaders are recognizing that we can't just relax now that we're over the pandemic. Yeah, okay, so this is high. So I've run this poll a few times over the last month with different groups. And here it's a little bit higher, especially around the future-looking things, knowing what's over the horizon, preparing for more disruption and change, are higher than what I've seen in many other groups. Okay, so thank you for that. What does it mean? What does it mean? And what do we need to do as a result of that? So thank you again for taking part in that. So there's a process called scenario planning. Some people may know about it. I run scenario planning workshops for my clients, for leaders who want to look at the future, and is understanding what's over the horizon and what things might disrupt and change you. It was kind of developed in the 1970s by Shell. So Shell, the senior leadership, said we don't know what's coming up in our future. This was back in the 70s, but still they could see some disruption in the future. So they put a small group of people, they took 3 men and put them in a little room, and they sent them away for 6 months and said, tell us what's coming up in the future so we can make better plans. So they looked at these scenarios like, what if Jimmy Carter becomes president of the USA? What happens if there's war in the Middle East? What happens if the OPEC countries restrict the supply of oil? They came up with all these scenarios, gave them possibilities and probabilities around each of them, and then took them to senior management. And the senior manager said, this is fantastic. Which of these is going to happen? And they said, no, that's not the way this works. What we've given you are some plausible scenarios with some likelihoods so that you can now do plan A, B, and C. So depending on what happens, and be willing to switch if this scenario plays out, or if you see this scenario about to happen. So that's kind of the birth of scenario planning. So it's now become quite a much more sophisticated process. So when I do it with clients, what we do is we start off with an environmental scan, like those experts at Shell did, to look at what's over the horizon. I'll give you a couple of examples, and we'll do a fun little exercise around that. And then you assess which of them are going to be short-term, medium-term, or long-term. Not impact on your business, but impact in the world. And the medium-term ones are the real sweet spot for leaders to look at. The short-term ones you're probably looking at already. The long-term ones, most of them you're safe to just leave them for the future, maybe stay alert, but think about them later. But the medium-term ones are the ones that could bite you in the bum if you're not careful, because they could very quickly become short-term. The next one is then you choose which are going to have an impact on you, because not everything is. And then how do you use it? How do you track, monitor, stay alert, and act as these things get closer? So just in scanning, let's do a quick exercise around this. One of these processes that I use is called the pestle analysis around the scan. So you look at what are the political, the environmental, the social, sociological, technological, economic changes, legal and economic changes that could affect us. So we spend quite a lot of time on this. It's quite a fun exercise when you do it. It's quite engaging, because many leaders say this is the first time that I've actually invested time in looking at the future and looking outside rather than just looking internally. And even if they look outside, they tend only to look at their industry, and this is an opportunity for them to look even wider than that. For example, here's a group that I worked for here in Western Australia. This was a board of an organization, and when we did the political bit, they came up with things like this. I've only picked like 10. There was like 30 or 40 things that came up. And you don't have to worry about whether they're likely or not. You don't have to worry at this stage whether they're long-term or not, but you just have to identify things. Then later you go and narrow them down. And I was so impressed with this group, because this was a couple of years ago, and they talked about things like increased defense spending. Number 10, global trade is vulnerable, and now we've got this in Australia, this AUKUS pact, and the big thing there is you're not trying to protect against an invasion. You're trying to protect against supply chains being blocked off in the South China Sea, in those areas. Other things like global war, destabilization. I think this happened just before Russia invaded Ukraine. So Busselton Airport, number 5, this was in Western Australia. Busselton's one of our regional cities, and it's now got it's expanded its domestic airport. So now if you're on the other side of the country, if you're in Sydney or Melbourne, you can fly directly into the Margaret River wine region. So if you want to visit Graham Harvey, it's only a short drive from there, rather than flying into Perth and then having a 3-hour drive. So that's going to change the face of that region. And Busselton, as a city, is trying to get funding to become an international airport. So then people will be able to fly in from Singapore, from Malaysia, from Hong Kong and Shanghai, straight into the Margaret River wine region in the southwest of Australia, which will change that region, it will change Western Australia, and it'll change Australia as a whole. So those are the sort of things that, is this likely or not? We don't know yet, because we're going to do that a little bit later. But I'm going to ask you, so what are the sort of things that you think, let's just look at political, which of those things do you think might have an impact on you? Just type in the chat. Okay, and it's not only these things. What other political things do you think might have an impact? You're welcome to borrow one of those, but if you think, sorry, let me be careful about the wording. It's not have an impact on you. Which of these things is going to have an impact in the future? So the trick here is not to think about, is this going to have an effect on my financial planning service or my insurer in the insurance industry or in aged care? The trick is to say, or the goal is to say, which of these things are going to change our future? Okay, just type a couple in the chat if you want to, or just do it privately if you want to. Yeah, widening gap between haves and have-nots. Absolutely. And look, that's political, it's economic, it's social, war zones. Yeah. HR law changes. Absolutely. So that comes under legal. Good. And yeah, war with China, climate change. Yeah, so like when we look at the environmental part of this pestle, there's a lot of things that are coming up with climate change. Good. Okay, so if you want to just do a quick example, if you want to do a quick pestle, you can do that with the scenario planning process, and just watch the recording if you're here live, and you'll see the 6 categories, and do that with your team or your leaders, or even better, get me to come in and do it for you. It really helps to have that external viewpoint as well. So I want you to always think externally. And there's also another little goodie that I've got for you. And if you want to do a survey, a self-assessment for yourself, and maybe even I'd recommend sharing this with your team and asking them to do that survey, you can download this. So this is like a workbook that goes along. It's actually the scenario planning workbook, but in the back of it, there's this survey. So you can download it there, just snap the QR code, and you'll get a direct link to download that to do some scenario planning. And as I said at the start of this masterclass, at the start of this session, people are asking me now 2 things. So the one is they want to know what's coming up over the horizon, and 2, they want to know how to lead in uncertainty. So they know there's uncertainty in the future. The best thing you can do is combine those 2 things. So you can give your people more, you can't give them certainty, but you can give them more clarity and confidence if they have some idea of what might be over the horizon. So those 2 things work together. So yes, so please download that. I think I've given you enough time to look at to snap the QR code now to get access to that. Any questions about that one? I'm going to move on to the last of these areas, which is around digital, and we'll spend not a huge amount of time on this, but our last, oh good, the timing is perfect. So we've got 15 minutes left, and we'll spend about 10 minutes on this digital. Okay. Let's talk about that. So this was another one this was in fact number 2, digital transformation optimization. I think the key to this is the second half of this phrase. It's extracting organizational value from it. It's about how can we do digital in a way that's not just doing digital for the sake of digital, but doing digital so it actually adds value to our organization in terms of our people, our teams, and particularly our customers. This is not saying that every customer wants to have digital engagement with you and nothing else. It's not true. However, the pandemic has forced many people to become more digital when they never had plans to before. And as a result of that they still want digital as an option. Many of them want it as an option that they can use, and they want the convenience of that, but they still want to go to the grocery store and talk to people at the checkout. But equally, they want the option to be able to do click and collect and home delivery if that's their choice. Okay, so how do you extract organizational value from it? As I said, the pandemic has accelerated this. Many organizations said that COVID-19 has been the biggest driver of digital transformation. It's like compressed 10 years of digital into 2 or 3. Macquarie said that most leaders said that yeah, they absolutely needed technology to get them through. And McKinsey said that using automation AI was significant and really important for them in the organization. The big thing that everyone's talking about technology now is artificial intelligence. This is something like I've been involved with for more than 30 years. My honors thesis back at uni more than 30 years ago was about artificial intelligence, which actually means two things. So one is, it means I'm old. And the second thing is, it means that I have had this background in this area. It's just that it hasn't reached a tipping point until now. It's like when people talk about the internet, they're mainly talking about it from, the late 1990s, but the internet was around from the 1960s. I was using it in the 1980s, but it didn't reach a tipping point until lots of people got access to it. It's the same with AI now, but AI has been around for a while, and I've been talking about it for a while. So for my clients here who've heard me tell these stories before, excuse me, I'm going to tell them again. But for example, there's one really famous story about Target in the USA in 2002, got into trouble with one of their customers because they were sending paper catalogs, and they sent out a catalog to one of their customers, a young 16-year-old girl, and in it had maternity products and baby products. And her parents were furious, and one of them marched down to the store and said, "I can't believe this. Are you trying to get my daughter pregnant?" And it turned out, no, she was already pregnant, but she hadn't told her parents. But Target knew because of the sort of things that she was buying, and not the obvious things, but also the sort of food that, like the change in her buying habits and what she was ordering for food. So Target then was able to tailor the catalog for her. And it became a big story, right? So this has been around for a while. Early in the pandemic in 2020, I shared some research on LinkedIn, which kind of blew up my LinkedIn feed. So 3 years ago, there was some research done by Oracle, about 2.5 years ago. They surveyed employees from lots of countries around the world, and most of them said that 2020 was their most stressful year ever. Not surprising. This was for most of them their first pandemic. And the thing that was really surprising, though, was this piece of research, which is the bit that I shared on LinkedIn, which has said that most people would rather talk about their mental health issues and their stress and anxiety to an AI chatbot than to a human. And this is like, I've got some furious responses on my LinkedIn feed. You can go back, and if you can be bothered, you can have a look at some of the responses to that post that I made there, which is just sharing this research, because some people said, no, AI could never do that. And others said, yeah, we can see how it could really help us. The following year, that same research, I picked out this piece of data, which said that 80% of people, employees, said that they would rather trust AI to help them plan out their career path than they would trust their manager or mentor or some other humans. And again, like, people thought this was just not possible. And then suddenly in last November, when ChatGPT became public, people recognized and realized the value of it. And now that we've got a whole bunch of people building on that, we've reached our tipping point there. I wrote an article for CEO magazine a couple of years ago, which you can download from our website, about competing in the age of AI. And the tiny print at the bottom, the subtitle says the robots aren't coming, they're already here. So you can read what I was saying 2 years ago, but more than that, I'd recommend that you experiment with things like ChatGPT, which is free, and experiment with what AI can do for you. That's only one part of digital, though. And really, let me do my last little exercise for you here, is to say, how digitally enabled are you? And there's digital and there's digital. It doesn't mean that it's not black and white. It's not saying, oh, we're not digital, or now we are digital. There's different levels of digital. So I'm going to ask you, and we won't do this as an online poll. Let me do this let me sketch it out for you here. I reckon there's 5 levels of digital. And what I'm going to ask you to do as I explain them is think about which level you're at, and then I'll ask you to write in the chat afterwards which level of digital you think that you're at, either as an organization or if you're responsible for a team, where you're at as a team. So the first one is bits. Bits versus atoms. So the perfect example of this is, how much paper do you have in your office? Paper is made of atoms, as opposed to having things digital. You might still be sending them around as email attachments, but they're digital, which are bits. And the thing with bits is they're cheap, They're easy to copy, to move around. They move at you can send them around the world at the speed of light. When you send around atoms, they're going at the speed of Australia Post. Okay, and there's a big difference. So there's no negatives on, I'm not criticizing Australia Post here, but there's a huge difference when you can send things around as bits. The next level is, are you putting your bits in the cloud? So does your, like, let's say within your organization, are your bits on a server? So cloud is like a server. Okay, so if you've got an internal server where people have access to stuff, then without having to ask for that information from somebody else, then you've got cloud access. So having bits is good, but if any time you want to ask for some information, you have to ask somebody to send you a spreadsheet, then that slows you down. If it's in the cloud, you've got access to that information. The next level is, I'm going to call it the technical term, API, Application Programming Interface. It simply means, do people outside the organization have access to your data with your permission? So in Australia, we've got open banking laws, which are fairly new now, which says that all Australian banks have to, by law, give access to third parties to customer transactions with the customer's permission. So if I'm a smart app developer and I want to develop an app that will tell customers about the green credentials and the climate change impact of their purchases, by the way, these apps exist, then your bank, the customer's bank, has to give access to that information. And it's good for customers. Like, banks want to hold on to their data, so they're not necessarily, they don't necessarily want to give it away, but the laws say that they have to. So and for good reason. So if you do this, it means it's easier to do things like allow freelancers, and you can outsource stuff, because now they've got access to your data. And the next level up is artificial intelligence, and we've touched on that briefly, and I think this is going to be a really big topic over the next few years. And the one on top of that, which very few organizations go to, is platforms. So have you become so digital that you've created a new business model? Well, I won't talk a lot about that, but an obvious example that many of us are familiar with is the Apple App Store. So Apple makes most of its money from, it's a hardware company, right? It sells MacBooks and iPads and iPhones, but it has a huge multi-billion-dollar a year arm of its business called the App Store. And the App Store is where Apple allows other companies, even its competitors, to sell to Apple customers. Okay, so you're allowing other people to sell to your customers. Now, Apple clips a ticket on every sale, and so it makes a multi-billion dollars every year, but it's created a platform for other businesses to sell to your customers. Okay, that's at the top level of digital. So if I ask you in the chat, which level are you at of digital? Are you at the level where most of your, most things are in bits and you're not having lots of physical stuff? Have you got most of your information on either a safe cloud out in somebody else's server, or maybe your own server? Are you at the level where you've got an API where other people can tap into it? Are you really leveraging AI on your data that you hold in your organization, or maybe you built a platform? Okay, so what am I saying? Bits, cloud. Okay, good. Some people got APIs. Cloud API, great. Good to see. Some AI, API. Okay, so good. So this is just a snapshot in time, right? So this just says, this is where we are now. And when I've done this, like especially over the last couple of years, this is a typical scale. So typically, many people are saying, yeah, we're using some sort of cloud. If you're a small business, you might be using Dropbox, which is a cloud platform. If you're a larger business, you'll be using some sort of Microsoft network enterprise network software. And so then you've got things still in the cloud. Okay, so the higher you're up here, further up the scale you are, the more digital you are. So look at ways to become more digital. If you want this model, it's in my book, Disrupted, which I'll tell you about, which I'm just about to give you a copy of. So, but that's where we are with digital. Okay, so don't think of just non-digital versus digital, just look at different grades of digital. Any final questions about that? Okay, if you do have any questions, feel free to reach out to me after this masterclass. If you're watching the recording, you'll have all the contact details there as well. So just a quick summary. Here are the 4 things that we looked at. Cybersecurity, very little, but the others we looked at in a little bit more detail. Some things that didn't make the list are things that you might have thought should be really high priorities. Now, these are all things that were on the list, but they didn't make the list of the top 4. Okay, so these are all in the report, and it's very easy to find the report. It's free. It's an easy download. Just search for KPMG, Keeping Us Up at Night. And if you're really, really interested, you can download what the previous years and see how leaders' mindset has changed. But that's my job. That's up to me to do. I reckon just download the one for 2023. Love you to get a copy of my book, Disrupted. It's a full copy. It's a full digital copy. So if you just go to gihanperera.net/book, or just scan the last QR code that I've got here for you, then please download the book and use it. And you'll see there's something in the book that says you have my permission to share it with anyone else. So especially the print copy of the book, I reckon, and I've designed it so that like the left-hand page is like a little mini article, and the right-hand page is an exercise or a quotation, or it's kind of designed so you can read it in little snippets. So you can read, you can get one idea in a couple of minutes. And if you get an idea you really like, I've said in the print book, either rip out the page or take a photo and send it to somebody else who you think should also be reading it. Same with the digital one. And if you want to send the digital copy of the book to somebody else, a full copy, you have my permission to do so. So thanks everyone for coming along. Thanks so much for taking part and for engaging now. And I always reckon if you can take some quick action, like after we hang up, then it's really better than waiting a long time and then taking a large action. So take one idea away from what you got, maybe from somebody else in the room or from me, and put that into action. If you want to know more about scenario planning, there's a link to the download the scenario planning handbook again, and that'll give you information. But if you want to just talk to me about scenario planning, you'll find it on my website. What I say to everybody is at the end of my presentations, don't wait for everything to be perfect. Don't wait for all your ducks to line up in a row. COVID has proven this to us, that you have to start before you're ready, because that's the best way to be fit for the future. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for coming. If you've got any questions, please stay in touch. All my details are at gihanperera.com. Stay safe and healthy. See you in the future. Bye for now.